Listen to Jayant Bhandari talk about the reason why Indians are buying gold. An absolutely fascinating title, Jayant, and I think you're going to enlighten us with some of the cultural reasons behind this as well, which I personally have a great interest in. A few words about Jayant. He's well known as a letter writer. He has written for many research articles, particularly Fraser Institute, Casey Research, Mining Journal, Zurich, Lee Rockwell, the Northern Miner, and I know you're also a letter writer, a speaker at the PDSC this year, which of course I'm very personally grateful for. You've also been actively involved as an analyst, and you have set up some Swiss and English subsidiaries in India, so you're very well versed on this subject. I think we all look forward to hearing about it. I know there's a lot of people online as well, so over to you. Thanks, Jayant.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thanks for coming for my talk today. I'm going to talk about why certain people have historically bought so much gold. So the question is, why do, let's say, Saudi Arabians, people in Oman, Yemen, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Malaysia, why do these people buy so much gold? They have done it historically. Are they experts in monetary economics, the reason why they have bought so much gold? Okay, so in my view, the real reason why these people have bought so much gold is because their economies are negative yielding economies. Their economies have forever been negative yielding economies, except for an interlude of the last 3 decades. My job today is to do these 3 or 4 things. I want to show you what living and existing in a negative yielding economy is like. And I'm going to give you an example of India. I want to break that country down into different sectors of the economy to talk about what negative yields mean. But more importantly, I want to talk about the cultural reasons why negative yields come to exist. Because I like first principles. I like to know why certain things happen. Because in my view, what cultural underpinnings Middle East and South Asia has are increasingly showing their signs in the Western world. And my conclusion will be why negative yields will become increasingly common in the West, because culturally you are mirroring the cultural issues of Middle East and South Asia. So I'm going to start with giving a portrayal of what I think is happening around the world. And I'm going to break down my portrayal of the world into 2 parts, the West and the rest. Now, why should I be so simplistically breaking down the world into 2 parts? When I say the West, I mean the Western civilization, which is North Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand. And when I say the rest, I pretty much mean everything outside the Western civilization. The question remains, why should I do such a simplistic job of dividing the world into 2 parts? Ladies and gentlemen, there was something that happened in Europe 2,500 years back that distinguished the Western civilization from the rest. And the reason the West got distinguished from the rest continues today. And that is why I must break the world into 2 parts. What happened in the West 2,500 years back? Greco-Roman philosophers found the concept of reason in the West. it took a long time for the seeds of reason to germinate in the Western civilization, and then the seedlings started cropping up around a millennia back in the West. You had Reformation, you had Renaissance, you had Age of Reason, you had the scientific revolution, industrial revolution, and the Age of Enlightenment. What you see around you on the streets here and the wealth that the West has generated is at the very core because of discovery of this concept of reason. And because this concept of reason got infused into the Western society. Now those people who have grown up in a rational society find it strange that I talk about the concept of reason. But you have to visit the rest with an open eye to understand that the concept of reason, which you might take to be natural, is not actually a natural phenomenon. It is actually a very alien concept to most of the world. Okay, so let me give a portrayal of what I think is happening in the Western society today. Western society 500 years back were very simple societies. They were based on agriculture and associated industries. About 70 to 90% of Western economies were agricultural economies. 500 years later, agriculture is a minuscule part of the Western civilization. The structure of government, however, in the West has pretty much stayed the same, with one very important change. The kind of people who ran the governments when democracy came into existence in the West about 200 years back is completely different from the kind of people who run your governments today. Bureaucrats and politicians in the Western society 200 years back were extracted from the society. They were invited to run your governments because they had achieved something. They had created wealth. They were writers or artists. They had created an influence on the society, the reason why they were invited on a part-time basis to work for the government. And the kind of democracy you had today was has no connection with the democracy that you have today. Those days, only taxpayers, property owners, a select minority of the society was allowed to vote. Now, things have changed completely. What you have is professional politicians and career bureaucrats. Now, who are these people? These people go from their mommy's lap to an Ivy League college and then to a job in the government earning $250,000 salary. The reality is that the real life on the street is extremely complex and uncertain. Even in Zurich, life is about uncertainty and complexity. But the problem with these bureaucrats and politicians is that they have no real life experience. And hence they take very simplistic, irrational, and stupid decisions. So that's how your government has changed. But how have the people who vote for these government has changed? The kind of people who now vote in elections is everyone. Everyone has the right to vote today. And these, so much so that the minority that was allowed to vote 200 years back, their vote makes no influence on the voting decision. Government is decided by the masses. Now, even in the most enlightened society in the world, and I travel around the world, I have seen one thing, including in Switzerland. Majority of the people are masses. They do not think, they will not think, and they would rather die than think. They wait for their Friday evenings so that they can finish work. These people are incapable of reasoning, and they are incapable of strategic planning. But they decide who runs your institution that does strategic planning for your society. Now, the problem is, why has this state of affair come to exist in the West? I don't have a full explanation to it, but there has been a huge infusement of cultural Marxism into the Western society. In my view, for the last 200 years, but this has gained pace over the last 50 years. This was a society that had pride in hard work and good quality work, but now the sense of entitlement, the sense of free stuff, wanting free stuff as a right has become an ingrained part of the Western society. They still, in the West, they still have the habits and patterns developed over 2.5 millennia based on reason. So you still have a very good habits and patterns and infrastructure, but the foundations have got corroded increasingly with time. In my view, in the last 200 years, since the end of Age of Enlightenment, the Western civilization has increasingly moved back, regressed to its pre-rational past. Okay, let me talk about the rest. And as I said, the rest here is pretty much everything outside the Western civilization. Now, the countries in the rest have grown hugely over the last 3 decades. And if you talk with people from the World Bank or IMF, and even people from these countries, they will mention 3 reasons why their countries grew so fast. These are the 3 typically mentioned reasons. A spread of democracy, economic liberalization, public education. So let me just elaborate on these things. Yes, economic liberalization happened a bit in many of these countries. I grew up in India. I saw economic liberalization happen. They pulled back maybe 10 regulations, and the next day they imposed 100 more regulations on the society. So when they say economic liberalization happened in those countries, it's a complete myth, ladies and gentlemen. It has no reality. Now, democracy. Yes, this stupid concept of democracy has spread around the world, in Africa, in the Middle East. And don't you know what democracy is doing to Europe today? A lot of people were very euphoric about what was happening with Arab Spring. And Arab Spring continues in Syria and Iraq and Libya, and they are knocking your door already. So that's what democracy means. Democracy, the problem is that all these nice concepts that developed in the West, because of the concept of reason, once you implant them on irrational societies, they mutate to adapt to accommodate the underlying irrationalities of those societies. What you think human rights, women's rights, or democracy means is not what those people understand as democracy. What is democracy in the minds of Middle Eastern people, Africans, other Asians? Something for nothing. That's how democracy has been marketed to them. And when they conceptualize democracy, for them it's something for nothing. Even in Hong Kong, which is an extremely awakened country in my view, the concept of democracy, the kids just want free stuff. So now the question that must linger on in your mind is, why did the rest grow so fast? And there's only one response I have to that. Internet. Telephony became extremely cheap in the late 80s. Internet came into existence in the early 90s. And internet set up pipelines for massive transfer of technology from the West to the rest. The rest was able to copy technology from the West. They were able to pluck the fruit which were a result of Western creativity. It is the only reason why this synchronous growth happened in these emerging markets. But unfortunately, they never got the concept of reason. I see that again and again. In fact, and I hope I turn out to be wrong, my view is that they have been disincentivized from learning the concept of thinking, reasoning, critical thinking, argumentation. Why? Because they became too rich too quickly without the underlying concept of reason. Now, these emerging markets, the rest is now mostly stagnating because they have plucked the low-hanging fruit that became available to them because of internet. The reason why they are stagnating. Now, I forgot to address one more issue, and that's about public education. Public education has spread around the world. I'm sure a lot of you go to Africa and South Asia. Have you seen girls in uniform carrying pots of water or adults carrying heavy weight on their head? And did you admire them for their physical courage and how it's good for their spine? Ladies and gentlemen, if you admired them, you don't really travel properly. The reason you see schoolgirls carrying pots of water on their head is because the concept of wheel hasn't really left any imprint in their brains. They have gone through formal education, but they haven't really understood the concept of the wheel. The public education as it stands today in most of the rest is a disaster. It's another set of belief, faith, dogma in their brains because they never learned the concept of reason, which should underlie the concept of education. So in my view, the rest, apart from, of course, better economies are worse off today than they were before all this started. Okay, so this is my view about the view on what's happening in the world. The rest is reverting back to its stagnant, negative yielding economies. For the first time, or at least many people I know in the West are for the first time encountering what a negative yielding economy is about. The rest has had it forever. You now have negative yielding bonds, and American companies sit on trillions of dollars of cash, earning themselves negative real interest rate. Anyway, let me now take you to India. Come with me to India, to New Delhi, and I'll help you understand what a negative yielding economy is like. And I'm going to talk about four most important sectors of the economy in India. Now, imagine that you are in New Delhi and you have a surplus at the end of the year. Okay? So where would you invest your money? Let's look at one sector at a time. Property market. Indian property market gives you a rental yield of less than 2%. Less than 2%. Now, this is the background information. Inflation rate in India tends to be more than 8%. Government bond yield tends to be less than inflation rate. So government bond yield historically, forever, has provided you negative returns in India. And I don't know how to do math on a less than 2% rental yield. It's an extremely negative yielding sector of the economy. Let me talk about the stock market. The earnings yield from the stock market is about 5%. Now, remind yourself, inflation rate in that country tends to be more than 8%. But it gets much worse. Indian companies pay almost no dividend. And I used to follow Indian portfolio of one boutique firm at one point of time. Corporate governance is in a very bad shape in that country. So with less than 1% dividend yield an inflation rate of 8.5, higher than 8%. I don't know, again, how you do math on that, but it is an extremely negative part of the Indian economy. I'm, of course, not encouraging you to invest in India. Now, let's look at the cattle market. And why should I be bothering about the cattle market? About 60 to 70% of Indians is still work in the agricultural and associated sectors. Cattle market provides me some numbers to get a glimpse of the rural agricultural sector of India. Now, these are the numbers. You invest in cows, what do you get? An average return from investing in cows is minus 64%. Now, this is a very liquid market of 280 million cattle. So individual idiosyncrasies or lack of understanding of economics should not really matter. The return from owning buffaloes is minus 39%. Now, even if you assume that the people who live at your home are worth, their labor cost is worth zero, the return is still minus 6%. That is the return from, pretty much that gives you a glimpse of the returns from investing in the rural agricultural sector of India. Now, imagine again, ladies and gentlemen, that you are in India, you have surplus at the end of the year, you put your money in a stock market, you will lose it because negative yields. You put your money in property market, negative yields again. You put your money in manufacturing and infrastructure, negative yields again. You put your money in rural agricultural sector, negative yields again. What would you do? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the reason why Indians buy gold, because they have no other place to keep their surplus. So yes, I understand there's monetary reasons why people buy gold, but the real reason they buy gold is because their economies are negative yielding economies. Okay, so, but this is not the end of my presentation, because I want to understand the principle behind it. What makes an economy negative yielding? 68% of Indian household surplus ends up in gold and property. Now, even the most fanatic gold bug among you must think, why should this wretched, poor country, where more than 50% of people don't have toilets, no water supply, no electricity, no primary health care, buy so much gold? That's a rational question. For example, in this photograph, why should they not buy tractor? But of course, I have explained you the reason. Everything offers you a negative yield in that country. So let me zoom in on the fundamental reason why negative yields come to exist. I have never met an honest public servant in India. I still spend about 2 or 3 months a year in India. They all stand up like beggars asking you for bribes. You arrive in New Delhi airport, Bombay airport, and I don't know if when you go there you see it, but even before you exit the custom place, they start coming to you offering to take bribes to let you get out without getting checked by the customs. That's the level of corruption in that country. Now, that's all good and nice to say in this politically correct world, because we can blame everything on politicians and bureaucrats. But as I mentioned earlier, it's easy to blame it on the institutions. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, is the culture. It's an extraordinarily corrupt culture where you cannot trust your own brothers and friends. And that is the reason why this corruption exists in the institutions. You can superficially try to remove corruption from institutions, but it won't work, because people come to me, when I'm in India, they come to me and brag about the fact that they stole someone's property and got away with that. Why does that happen? because they don't differentiate between right and wrong. And you have to remember, as long as you don't have the concept of reason, you cannot differentiate between right and wrong. The virtues that you associate with modern civilizations cannot exist. 10 commandments can't exist. Compassion doesn't exist. And you can see, you know it, why Syrians, the people around them don't help. It's Europe which helps them. It is the underlying dishonesty of that society that makes it corrupt. Now, the problem is that if you don't have the concept of reason, the natural state of the universe is what? Entropy. Things tend to get dissipated. Western civilization found the concept of reason, and reason is the glue which enables intellectual and financial capital accumulation. Without reason, everything tends to get dissipated and lost. And this is the reason why India is a negative yielding economy. Yes, it grew over the last 3 decades, but not because of its own concept of reason, but because they were able to exploit easy import of technology and products of Western creativity. So this is my conclusion on India, but I'm going to go on for a bit more. It's an extremely irrational society. It's a very superstitious society. It's very difficult to protect your surplus among people that you can't trust. And the structure is such, because of the underlying irrationality of the system, every use of capital, any system has negative yields. Capital gets depreciated at a very rapid rate in that country. And it is for this reason that Indians buy gold. There has been an economic growth for the last 3 decades, and people lost a bit of their interest in gold. It is starting to stagnate, and Indians are showing increasing signs of buying more gold. Okay, so this is my view on what is happening in the Western society. The infusion of cultural Marxism is nothing but an import of irrationality from the rest to the West. You are adopting cultural lack of values of the rest in the Western society. As your society and institutions continue to become irrational, capital will have a tendency to get dissipated. Economic growth will stagnate, and negative yields will become increasingly common as time goes by. Of course, you see negative yields in very limited aspects of the Western economy, but in my view, I spend a lot of my time in Europe and North America, and the oppressive regulations that you have, why do they happen? Because the whole institutional mechanism has become extremely irrational in the West today. And it will get permeated down to the lowest level of the society eventually. As irrationality becomes more common, as negative yields become more common, Western society will, rational people in the Western society will protect their surplus by investing in gold, because it will no longer make sense to them to invest in manufacturing or infrastructure or in any creative endeavors. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I still have about 10 minutes, so I can take some questions.
Subjugate for 5 years or 4 years to somebody else
Oh, well, actually, I mean, I love Switzerland, and I hope I can move here one day. Switzerland is truly one of the finest places to be in. I love being in Switzerland. And people here take pride in their work. This morning, I ordered for a coffee, and there was a small fleck of coffee powder on the cup. And the girl there saw that fleck, and she came running after me to take back that cup to give me a new coffee. And I said, don't worry about it. It's just a fleck of coffee powder. But that's the pride people take, and that's what you said, that because the decisions are made at the very bottom level, people take pride in their work, they do a good job, and I fully agree with you. But remember, from my perspective, living in India, there's hardly any difference between Sweden and... Yes, sir.
I'm interested to hear what you might think about the change in reserve currency system, which many people feel is coming at some point in the relatively near future, and how that might impact India specifically.
If you see, I come from first principles, and I think as long as the underlying culture is corrupt, you can make changes at the superficial level, but it won't really change anything. Yes, you can change the reserve currency system. You can make gold the currency. But the problem is that if the underlying people are corrupt, they will just screw up whatever system you create. For me, gold is not money, but I still think gold is what people will go for because they will have nothing else to left. So my interest in gold is mostly because of that reason rather than based on expectation that it might become the next reserve currency. Yes, sir.
I have a question to what you said concerning in India that they don't really know what is right or wrong, or that it doesn't matter. Probably wrongly indicated, but I heard about karma, thought that's an Indian concept, and that it's somehow what I do will reflect what will happen to me later on. So if you can maybe educate me a little bit about how it's looked at in India.
So there's also a saying in Hindi that religion is for the temple and work is for the office. Basically, this rhymes very well in Hindi, and it translated into what it actually means in English. It means is that when you step out of the temple, forget about religion, forget about all the nice things we talked about inside the religion. There's also another saying in India that you can only scoop butter with a crooked finger. So, and that's, people talk about it. People mention it when you talk with people. So, yes, karma is important, but you see, people who are not rational, they can have cognitive dissonance. They can hold different beliefs in their brains. So they can pray a cow, and if you watch it properly, you will see what I'm telling you. They will pray, they will massage the cow, they will feed the cow, and when the prayer is open, they will pick up a stick and beat up the cow because they want to get rid of it. So karma talk can happen, but unless it's connected in principles in their brains, it does not work. Yes, sir.
Some enormous reserves of gold in India in a temple or somewhere. You haven't heard much about it since. What had actually happened to that?
I actually haven't heard about it either, actually. There is a lot of gold with a lot of temples in the country, and that continues to exist in temple. But I don't know. I know which temple you're talking about. There were these hidden caves within the temple with a lot of gold. I haven't kept track of what happened. Probably stolen up. I mean, politicians, priests, they are living a good life. Yes, sir.
I got the microphone. Hello.
Okay. So
Hello.
maybe Egon first. Sorry.
I just want to know the split. You said 60-something, 63%, whatever it was, between gold and property. Do you know the split within the 63%? What is gold and what's property?
Okay. So sorry, I don't remember the number exactly. I think about how 1/3 of the household savings probably end up in gold and the rest in property, out of that 68% of household savings. But I can send you the numbers later if you want me to send those to you. Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to say that this was a very original lecture and I enjoyed it very much. Secondly, you talked about Marxism. Marxism didn't come from the West. So what are the sources of this Marxist influence on the West now?
Marx provide a nice textbook for these people to put on a nice facade. Marxist philosophy was accepted by Russians, Chinese, and Africans and Indians because it went along very well with their underlying irrationality. So yes, the priest came from the West, but the subjects were, he could find the followers in the rest. Yes, sir.
I see a major problem of today's crisis in the overpopulation of the world, especially of these countries in in Africa and in the Middle East. And that's the problem we see with these refugees.
Yeah, well, it's funny because IMF and World Bank claims that increasing population of India is a demographic dividend, and it should have been a demographic dividend, except that a large number of Indians who come out of schooling and universities cannot even write their own names. They are extremely badly trained, and I can't control 5 people. I can't give them 5 simple instructions in India. So if to a worker who probably gets paid $30 a month, here they get $30 an hour, if I tell him to get me a glass of water and a cup of coffee and get me clean up my garbage, I make life very complicated for him. And I guarantee you, absolutely guarantee you, it won't get done. I have to send him for water first, then I have to ask for coffee next. And this is why these people are incapable of manufacturing industry, and that is why manufacturing sector refuses to develop in that country. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.